All right, I'll dive right in. Just 1 second. Okay. Yes, title of my presentation is Macroeconomics Beyond Growth, which is almost like the title of the book that you see here. That's my dissertation that was published in 2018. And I'm very happy to present parts of it here. I want to start by linking it a bit on the broad level to the session early on today. And I would say that you will see a couple of things that are similar or the same outcomes, but also a couple of things that I hope are new ideas. And that's related to when you see the subtitle of my dissertation, that I look at neoclassical, Keynesian, and Marxian theories. And I think by including neoclassical and Marxian theories, we get a couple of new aspects in here. This is what I'm going to do. I want to present the research method that I used. Then I look at the neoclassical, then the Keynesian and the Marxian theories, in particular the results. And what I did then is try to synthesize them. You will see that in the method part. And then if I still have time, Valeria, you're going to give me a sign when I have 10 minutes left, right?
Yes, I can raise my hand so that you know that you have 5 minutes.
Okay, that's wonderful. Because if I still have time, I'm going to talk a bit on the role of digitalization that I'm investigating at the moment, but that will only be kind of a side remark. All right, so coming to the research method. The question that I asked, and that is very much here in this session, I think, is which macroeconomic conditions lead to sustainable economies without growth? And this economies without growth, I mean, that's the goal, and that includes in particular ecological, but also social and economic sustainability. And how I operationalized it is by asking what are the conditions for zero growth? And this has been very much the topic of the former session as well, so it nicely links up. How do I define sustainability or sustainable economies? It includes economic stability, low inequalities, and environmental sustainability. So not only economic stability, I would say. And what I did is, you will see that in a minute, I looked at 29 different theories or models and developed the conditions for zero growth within these theories or models. And then I first combined them, synthesized them for each school of economic thought, and then afterwards synthesized the 3 schools of economic thought. So this, I'm not going to talk about it very long, but this is the contents of, or most of the contents of my dissertation. And what you see here is I looked at a lot of different theories. I'll tell you that in a bit more detail in a second. What's the theoretical background or the methodological background? It's based on the concept, the method of interested pluralism that has been developed by Dobusch and Capella, as you see below. And the basic idea is that you can combine different theoretical approaches, different theories, and see how their theoretical statements relate to each other, and then deal with them according to how they relate to each other. So you take a theory from, let's say, Keynesian perspectives and one from Marxian perspectives, and they say something concerning, let's say, investments or saving, and then you see, are they identical, are they convergent, compatible, neutral, divergent, or contradictory? I'm not going to go into detail here. And then you can deal in different manners. And so that's integration, division of labor, diversification, and test of conflicting hypotheses. And as you will, or as I experienced in the dissertation, most of the time, you can integrate them or have a division of labor or diversify. That means regarding different circumstances, you take one theory or the other. Where it really becomes difficult is when they are contradictory, and that you have to test a conflicting hypothesis, which is kind of difficult. So the one that I was really confronted with is the relation between savings and investments, very different perspectives for neoclassical and Keynesian theoretical backgrounds. And I basically decided then I believed the Keynesian ones, but it's still you have to make a decision there. So there are conflicts when you take this plural perspective. Okay, coming to the first one, neoclassical theories. And here, just to give you an idea, I had a couple of theories that I called fundamentals. So that's what you learn in the textbooks. Then I looked at a couple of endogenous technological change theories. And then I looked at a couple of theories, that's chapter 8 here, that include environment. And I think here it becomes really interesting because, as we said in the last session, or as Victor in particular pointed out, my motivation was very much the limitations, the environmental limitations leading to zero growth ideas. And here, a couple of neoclassical theories touch upon that or deal with that. So what's the general result? I mean, I cannot go into detail into all of these models or theories, but the general result is, first, in comparison to the investigations that other people did before me, I was really surprised that from a neoclassical perspective, and that is a couple of years ago, but I haven't seen many approaches since then either. There are none. So there are two exceptions: a working paper by Ehrman and an interview by Robert Solow, who both say zero growth is not a problem within neoclassical theories, but they are both quite short and don't go into detail. So my result is similar. Zero growth is feasible when there are no instabilities. And I mean, I have my severe problems with neoclassical theories. Nevertheless, I think it's interesting to point that out. There are no, you don't have a problem with unemployment in neoclassical theories. You don't have a problem with instabilities. That's maybe also due to the fact that I looked at mostly at growth theories. So that works. And the general condition that, I mean, I try to combine a lot of different models here, but the general condition is that they are supply side models. So you need a constant aggregate supply. And that means the sum, and it's really quite simple, the sum of the developments of the supplies and productivities of the production factors, and those are the three, have to balance each other out. So basically the perspective is, when you have more labor, you need to apply less capital or less natural resources, and then it becomes to have zero growth. And then it becomes interesting when you look at technological change, which in the neoclassical paradigm is augmenting technological change. So the technological change is modeled in the manner that it increases it multiplies the amount of the production factor. So it's just, before you had 20 hours at work, and now you have technological change, and now those 20 hours of work have the same productive capacity, but now it's 25 hours. So now they have 25 hours of productive capacity. So that's how it's being modeled. And then you can have labor augmenting technological change, and that outbalances a reduction in natural resources so that you have zero growth. That's the overall perspective that is applied there. One side remark, let's say, is that capital accumulation in the models is not that important. So you have labor supply, you have the supply of natural resources, you have technological change, but capital accumulation kind of adjusts to the other supplies, because capital is accumulated according to its marginal productivity. So when you have more natural resources or more labor supply, capital accumulates. Also, when you have technological change, it stops accumulating when marginal productivity equals the depreciation rate. Okay, so combining all of those theories, I developed 3 different scenarios how zero growth conditions can be met within those theories. And the first one is, in most of the theories, you only have labor augmenting technological change, or in many of the theories. So then you need to have a reduction in labor, or a sensible manner of modeling it is to have a reduction in labor supply to outbalance this increase in technological change. The technological change is often exogenously given, so that's quite obvious. And how that is being done within these models is either just also exogenously, so labor supply is exogenous, or it's due to the choices of individuals. So the idea there would be, and I don't think it makes so much sense, but the idea there would be that people decide to work less and they increase their preference for leisure, which might be a part of the story, let's say. The second scenario, or the second group of theories, still has labor augmenting technological change, but they include some supply of natural resources. And here, those two can balance each other out. So you can reduce the supply of natural resources or the supply of energy and counterbalance that by technological change. And the third one that and that connects to our debate before, I think, that I find interesting is in particular directed technological change, where under certain conditions, in particular under higher prices of natural resources, you get a different type of technological change that is resource augmenting rather than labor augmenting, and that can balance out the supply of natural resources. However, all of these groups under these conditions lead to zero growth. And this here shows that in both of the second and third scenario, the supply of natural resources goes down. The outcome, and then the question is, what type of technological change comes out? So does it lead to labor augmenting or resource augmenting technological change? And the only difference is then the price of labor and the price of resources, and thereby the revenues of the workers and the owners of resources. So it's a distributional issue that comes out of that. All right, that was the short summary of neoclassical theories. Now I get into the Keynesian theories, and there again I looked at what I call fundamentals. So I looked at Keynes, Harrod, Doma. I put here in the neoclassical synthesis, it's somewhere in between. I put it here in between neoclassical and Keynesian theories. I looked at Kalecki, Calder, Robinson, etc. I looked at monetary theories, and then again I looked at theories that include environment, and here also one paper by Fontana and Sawyer. In general, I think this is a bit repetitive. Well, there were few investigations on economies without growth or on zero growth, and they looked at specific theories, and that's always, you have a specific model, and then it depends on one, often on very specific assumptions. So Binswanger, for example, which we can discuss whether he is a Keynesian. I included him here anyway. He has a very particular assumption that capital assets are being accumulated within the banking sector, and this is the growth imperative in his theory. But the point here is there were few investigations, which is, this is why we're here, so this is great. And then the general condition is within these theories, the neoclassical perspective is very supply-sided. Then here it's an interplay between aggregate supply and aggregate demand that leads to constant effective demand. And again, I combined these different theories to result into 4 different scenarios, which are not that different to what we heard. So the first scenario, I think, is from the mindset the most close to most Keynesian works. So an increase in labor, there is increase in labor productivity, and it is outbalanced by reduction in average working hours. And at the same time, this increase of labor productivity is used to increase the hourly wage. This means that, let's say, per person, there's a constant wage, and also overall there's constant wage income. This relates to constant consumption, what we heard before as well. And as long as we have this working hours reductions per person, we have constant employment. employment here, the number of workers. We have a decrease in hours, in working hours, which relates to what Malcolm Sawyer said before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As I said, constant consumption is basically the first one. The second one is constant government spending, and together they lead to a constant demand for final goods, constant consumption, constant government spending. And the third one is constant net investments. Here I is the gross investment, and that equals to capital depreciation. And zero net investments result from the constant demand for final goods, because firms experience the constant demand, and therefore they have the incentive to keep their production capacity constant, equal. And this leads to an overall aggregate demand and aggregate supply to stay the same, because aggregate demand is consumption plus government spending plus I, and then supply depends on the capital stock, so that it stays the same. The net savings are also zero, as net investments are zero. And this again, I think there are a lot of overlaps, so maybe it's true then. A condition is that there's no continuous accumulation of assets by one group. I would emphasize the continuous accumulation, because I would argue that, of course, you can have temporary accumulations of an actor, but then it would have to go the other way around after sometimes, because otherwise one actor has to go into constant debt. So this is the main scenario and the main conditions, and then there was three other scenarios that only differ slightly, and that relates to a point that I made before in the session on technological change. So and this is not much developed. I mean, technological change that takes into account natural resources and energy. At least it was really hard for me to find it in Keynesian theories, but there is some work by Robinson actually, and based on that, I developed the scenario that if we have a different technological change that does not increase labor productivity, but material productivity is there, then you basically wouldn't have the reductions in average working hours. In the third scenario, and I think that's interesting, it's based on work by Harris. You could have instead of reductions in working hours. Screen now?
Yeah, in full screen.
Wonderful. Okay, I come to the Marxian theories, and here maybe it's the most interesting one because we haven't touched upon them yet, or only very shortly by Malcolm Sawyer, I would say, or the point of capital accumulation from a capitalist perspective. So here I looked at Marx theory and monopoly capitalism theory, that's chapter 17, and then some contributions on the environment and capitalism by Foster and Altvater from Germany and Schneiberg. Those are, they are a bit older. There are a few people working on them. And here I would say there were most investigations on this issue compared to neoclassical and Keynesian theories, and in particular by prominent figures. So by Foster, by Magdoff, by Harvey, who are prominent Marxists. And they argue basically that it's not possible to have zero growth in a capitalist economy. You would need an end of capitalism to have zero growth. And I come to a bit of a similar result, but I would say a bit more differentiated. So I would argue we need central institutions to change. So this is ownership, the ownership of firms, and a very different framework for the market would be needed. But let me put it this way: there cannot be that form of private ownership, capital ownership from a Marxist perspective, but there can be a market economy. And here there are two scenarios, and they are based on on two different conceptions of how the economy works. So the first one is Marx's conception, and he argues within a competitive capitalist system. So here the idea is, and he takes the framework of other classical theorists and argues within their framework for the sake of argument. And he says that there are many different firms and they compete. And how do they compete? They introduce new technologies that makes them more efficient in the sense that lower prices per product, but also in order to do that, they increase their production capacities because there are economies of scale. And because a lot of firms do that, you have high investments on the macro level, and therefore you have economic growth, to put it in a nutshell. And now the conditions for zero growth economies, I stay within this framework in the argument and say, okay, there is price competition, there is a market, but we have to first react to this interest, and Malcolm Sawyer said that before, to this interest of, for Marx, it's the capitalist, or to the interests of the shareholders, let's say, who want to have capital accumulation in order to increase the wealth and the profits. And the reaction to that would be some type of collective ownership of firms, be it by cooperatives or in other forms. And the next one, diseconomies of scale, I think is very interesting, because this whole idea of why do firms try to grow, why do firms invest in order to stay competitive, is because there are economies of scale. They have to do it in order to stay competitive. So one would need to introduce diseconomies of scale so that there is maybe a perfect size in order to stay competitive. How do you do that? I think there are a lot of different possibilities. One is that nicely relates to the environmental aspect, is to have more expensive energy, and on the other hand have cheaper labor, so tax labor less. That would first, the most obvious one is that it would make transport more expensive, so that it becomes more competitive to have small scale production for a region. And the other one is that there are arguments that large scale production is related to more energy intensive production and to less labor and intensive production. This is not the only one. I think there are more arguments to be made, and this would be interesting research. So for example, if you would tax global companies as you tax, they pay very few taxes. If you would tax them more, this would also be a diseconomy of scale. And I think there could be more investigations in that. I think there's research to be done. The second scenario is based on this idea of monopoly capitalism, and it is based on on observations already in the 60s and 70s that actually we don't have a lot of small companies that compete, but we have within each market 2 or 3 or 4 big companies. In the US, that was the analysis, but now even globally, we have a few companies that compete in a single market. And this leads to a very different type of capitalism. So you have monopolistic competition. You have competition between these firms. I first have to explain it very shortly how that works. So they compete, and what do they try to do? They try to reduce costs by reducing labor costs, and they don't compete by innovating in a sense that they can offer their products at a lower price because they don't need to, because they have monopolistic power. What they do is, in these theories, they conduct the sales effort. So they have a lot of commercials. The whole idea of planned or unplanned obsolescence comes in here, maybe nicely relates to the topic tomorrow. So this is how the firms compete. And now the conditions for zero growth would be, okay, there's still monopolistic competition. I took that as a given, but then you would have collective ownership again to take this drive out of the companies to have the strong interest to grow in order to increase the wealth of the shareholders. And you somehow need to regulate the sales effort. So that could be regulation regarding planned obsolescence, that could be regulation on commercials. And again, expensive energy and less taxes or less costs for labor would help, because another way of reducing costs by these monopolistic firms is by using energy instead of labor. So I said that before, the central outcome here is that zero growth can be compatible with, I don't know whether it's still capitalism, but compatible within a setting that includes a very different type of market regulation and collective firm ownership from the perspective of Marxian theories. All right, how much time do I have left?
Yeah, actually, time it's up already, and I already gave you like 5 extra minutes because of the technical problems. So it would be great if you could wrap up.
Yeah, I can wrap up.
Okay.
So this is the overview of all the conditions that I integrated from the different theories, and this is, you see here the gray inside, and you see this this a bit bigger here, and it combines different aspects from the different theories, and it's, the different theories contribute to various aspects here. You cannot separate it as I will do now, but I do it very roughly. So on the upper hand, you see the supply side that very much relates to the neoclassical theories, and in particular the redirected technological change, but also the decreasing application of energy and natural resources, and a decreasing application of labor, so that you have a constant aggregate supply. On the lower side, you see the constant aggregate demand that very much relates to Keynesian analyses, with constant consumption on the right-hand side, constant government spending, and a sectoral change from dirty to clean products. And on the left-hand side, again, this relates to all theories, in particular also to Keynesian theories, but you see in particular on the left-hand side, regarding constant capital stock, the ideas of Marxian theories with diseconomies of scale to be introduced for zero growth, and collective firm ownership. All right, that's kind of the synthesis. And I will not talk about the role of digitalization, which is a pity, but that's fine due to time constraints. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.